As one woman has told me, it's the wound that you don't see, doctor. That's the one that hurts most deeply. I would like to thank the survivors who spoke courageously. You shared your stories with us today, and we resolve to continue to help you to change the course of history, because it's when the voices of women and girls are heard loud and clear that we're availed of the opportunity both to understand and to respond better. UNFPA, as a member of the Action Partners, is committed to ensuring that the voices of women and girls are heard, and that's what drives everything we and our partners do. So as we commemorate the 10th anniversary of the Mandate on Sexual Violence and Conflict, as we launch the fund, the Global Fund for Survivors, we salute Special Representative Pramila Patten and her extraordinary team for all that you've been doing and for gathering us on this historic day. UNFPA was a founding member of the UN Action Network Against Sexual Violence and Conflict, and we remain firmly committed to continued collaboration and coordination with you as we move forward along with the network partners. This interagency partnership catalyzes action, synergies. It helps us to overcome funding gaps in a number of the countries where we're working, and it's also been a key contributor to the gender-based violence information management system, because this data promotes safe and ethical collection and sharing of information that we need for better analysis, more prevention, and a better response. It's true, and we've heard, and it's been crushing to hear how widespread sexual violence and conflict is in the present moment. It's crucial that survivors receive the services and the support that they need to begin to heal, to recover, and to play their role in terms of their communities. UNFPA is usually there from day one of a crisis, and we're there during and we're there after. These are life-saving sexual and reproductive health services based on women and girls and men and boys' rights. This information, this coordination, these mechanisms that we've put in place together allow for us to be much more effective in terms of our GBV prevention and response, and connecting women and girls in safe spaces where they feel comfortable to provide the type of legal services and to promote the access to justice. This is what we're doing together. The critical population data of those affected to promote sexual and reproductive health and rights, and the agency of women and young people in the emergency response, and we've heard testimony to that effect today. When our teams join forces in these countries around the world, we do have obstacles. In Yemen, we've helped to overcome this by hiring local drivers. This has enabled us to be able to distribute life-saving rape treatment and other types of kits, reproductive health supplies, in the context of very limited humanitarian access. In Somalia, the very first female police officer in one of the communities where we work, herself now is supporting survivors of gender-based violence in her region. And she conducted a very thorough investigation of a case of gang rape of a young girl. She was able to identify 6 perpetrators who are all now in custody. This obligation, the trust that we have to keep women and girls safe and to help survivors of sexual violence to rebuild their lives, must be taken very seriously, and we certainly do that. As UNFPA, we recently led the development of a new interagency minimum standards for GBV and emergencies programming manual. These are standards that will be launched next month to ensure that we're actually providing quality services and to advance women and girls' leadership. They're perfectly capable of leading, and all we need to do is to bolster that ability. They are the ones typically who are first responders anyway, and with their guidance, we are engaging communities to end gender-based violence. So I would like to reiterate our gratitude for being part of this partnership, for the support that UNFPA during very turbulent times continues to receive at the country and the global level. Thank you for that, because sexual and reproductive health and rights are essential for all of us to be treated with dignity, and this is true everywhere, in every circumstance. We promise to continue to fight every single day for the health and safety of women and girls, and we're committed to delivering this life-saving, survivor-centered care with universal access to sexual and reproductive health services. This is what women and girls have desperately told us that they need for us to do to keep the promises that were made in Cairo at ICPD, so that these invisible wounds, which are just as devastating and crippling as the physical harm that survivors suffer, will be attended to. And more than that, the ultimate healer of sexual violence is justice. So I look forward to welcoming you and Special Representative Pramila Patten and Madame Phumzile and so many of us who will be in Nairobi next month to bring our contributions, including a session that is titled No Women, No Peace. Do join us, whether physically or virtually. The thousands of us that are coming to Nairobi will be speaking up, we will be standing up, and we will be demanding that we take action together for human rights, for justice, for survivors of sexual violence everywhere. Thank you.
For your participation. I should say, for those of you around the world, we get into a lot of alphabet soup here at the UN. It's UN Population Fund, not just UNFPA. I once gave a speech with only acronyms. It was quite funny. All right, we turn now to Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka, very known here at the United Nations and on every UN issue related to women, and as the Executive Director of UN Women. And so I'm going to direct two questions to you as we move along, because there's so much you could talk about. From your perspective, what would you say are the major achievements over the past 10 years? Easy question, right? In addressing and responding to sexual violence and conflict, and any commitments you want to put forward that highlight your work for the next 10 years. So just a magnum opus on what's here and what's next. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Madam Program Director. Thank you to my co-panelists. Let me start by congratulating Pramila for this important convening for the 10 years, which we also want to highlight as the 10 years where a lot of amazing and important work has been done. I want to also congratulate Margot as well as Zainab for laying the foundation. As it was explained earlier on, Margot laid the foundation. She hit the ground running without having a playbook for this, but managed to create a solid foundation that we've all benefited from. And of course, Zainab highlighted her focus on national ownership. We have also benefited from that, and now highlighting the successes, by the way. Mm-hmm. We benefited from the foundation because UN Women was born a year later. We're going to be 10 next year. So we've been your little sister coming after you and benefiting from every milestone that you have been making. The focus on ownership by member states meant that our offices were also able to have relatively open doors when we had to do work that was mutually supportive. And of course, Pramila, you have highlighted your focus on a victim-centric approach. something that is very important for all of us. For every step of the way, whichever emphasis you have made as you have been building this important institution, there has been collateral benefits for all of us, I think, sitting on this podium. We have also, over the time, increased awareness within the UN system and beyond on the crimes that are being committed against women, and thankfully that has also helped us to propel the adoption of normative instruments that now exist, those that exist within the Security Councils, within the member states in different countries, and also those that have been adopted by regional institutions. We also have national and regional plans on women, peace and security around the world, and in each of these plans there is a focus that is focusing on conflict-related sexual violence. We have in the last 10 years also been developing focal points on women, peace and security, which have now become institutionalized points of cooperation and collaboration between member states, very much led ably by member states, always leading in a pair of two member states who take turns to lead. And I must say that has also created a community of practice between and amongst member states who are now able to share best practice as well as the challenges. Between UN Women and OHCHR, we also have been able to work together to investigate and to document sexual violence against women. One of the pieces that we did was on Rohingya women. And again, we received a lot of support and encouragement also from your office. We conduct a course as UN Women on female military officers, which prepares and supports women in uniform to take their rightful places in the forces. And yesterday, listening to South African peacekeepers who have been deployed in different parts of the world, I was very encouraged about the work that they do and recognize that we actually need much more of the women who are playing that role. We also have a fund, Women, Peace and Humanitarian Fund, which has now reached civil society organizations in 70 countries, in 13 countries, and reaching out around 7,600 women in different parts of the world. And of course, we feel that this is a modest contribution, but we now have the template and we can fast track the deployment of these resources because there's a definite need and appetite for this support. So these are just some of the milestones. We are, however, very clear that the work and the progress is not where it's supposed to be, that there are many gaps. We've heard about the gaps today, and that we must never be confused that when we feel we've worked very hard, it means that we have succeeded. It just means that we have learned, we have made a contribution, and much more is still needed. So in the next phase, after this 10 years, we are committing ourselves to do different things because right now there's radical impatience that exists amongst all of us for better results, better impact. We definitely recognize the need for improved access to justice, both by the United Nations, the actors and civil society, and the survivors themselves. So I would want to highlight and commit ourselves as UN Women the dedication that we are going to have towards improving access to justice. We also have learned a lot about the importance of holistic services, something that we are doing together, and the fact that we have the UN Action Network that is bringing together protection services, access to justice, etc. We are committing ourselves to enhance accelerate the provision of those services. We also are committing ourselves to use the upcoming Beijing 25 moment, which will also be 20 years of the implementation of the Women, Peace and Security Resolution 1325, as another opportunity for us to take our work even to greater heights and to collaborate with all of you and to bring in young people also into this agenda, and through young people take this agenda also out of the capture of institutions and make it an issue of general public, of informal power, so that we are also able to be accountable to ordinary people as well as mobilize them to take their rightful place. I also want to thank the survivors in particular for their testimonies today, which were touching, and for the courage that has enabled you to be with us today. Thank you.
Much to ED Mlambo-Ngcuka, so much commitment for now and in the future. I would like to turn to Alexander Zuev, the Assistant Secretary General for the Rule of Law and Security Institutions of the Department of Peace Operations. The floor is yours.
Thank you. And in Mr. Zuev and Mr. Lacroix's absence, I've been asked to deliver the following remarks. And I will keep this short, but excellencies, survivors, distinguished panelists, and guests, we in the Department of Peace Operations are very proud to have served for the last 10 years as one of the co-leads of the UN team of experts on the rule of law and sexual violence in conflict. The team, operating with the guidance and leadership of SRSG Patton, assists national authorities to strengthen the rule of law with the aim of ensuring criminal accountability for perpetrators of conflict-related sexual violence. While we celebrate today 10 years of the mandate, as we have just heard, we must all do much, much more in this regard. This effort, when we're talking about the host countries of peacekeeping operations, requires a whole of mission support. And this starts with political engagement with host country authorities, something that the SRSG is able to do through her compacts with the host countries. Let me very briefly highlight some of the steps that we're taking together to support this agenda. Today, our 5 largest peacekeeping operations are mandated by the Security Council to address conflict-related sexual violence. And we've deployed women protection advisors to all of these missions. But again, it's really a mission-wide approach going from political to the technical. Early warning is one of the features of this. So peacekeeping operations have incorporated early warning indicators of conflict-related sexual violence into their broader protection strategies. And for example, in South Sudan, following human rights investigations, we were responding to sexual violence perpetrated in Northern Unity State, and UNMISS launched patrols in vulnerable areas as a measure to do their best to protect women that were threatened by attacks. Next, combining good offices and technical support to host country governance, peacekeeping operations contribute to the reinforcement of national institutions to address sexual violence. In every setting that I'm aware of, addressing conflict sexual-related violence, preventing it, is in the best interests of all. Peacekeeping operations also, working with many other partners, promote, support, and facilitate criminal accountability for conflict-related sexual violence. One example of that is the prosecution support cells operating in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, supporting Congolese authorities in the investigation and prosecution of sexual violence as an international crime. This has led to the conviction of even high-level commanders of the national military and armed groups. And this is against the backdrop of a situation where these high-level commanders in the past operated with almost complete impunity, with command responsibility for mass rape. Now, at least, they will have to think twice because there is the possibility of criminal accountability. Without going into more detail in the mission-specific areas, I would like to conclude by stating that the Department of Peace Operation commits its continuing support to host countries, to civil society, to the SRSG, and other UN partners to do more to combat sexual violence. We further commit to ensuring that the perspectives, needs, and recommendations of survivors inform our work to this end. While today we celebrate 10 years of the mandate, we almost realize we must redouble our efforts to address the scourge of sexual violence in conflict as expected by the survivors and as expected by humanity. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the important contribution of the Department of Peace Operations. I now turn to Simone Monasebian from the UN Office of Drugs and Crime. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Sisters and brothers, I thank the survivors here today for their extraordinary courage and vision. And I thank SRSG Patton and her stellar team for this exquisitely executed and most meaningful commemoration. The urgent need to stop sexual violence and conflict has become increasingly recognized in no small part thanks to the work of the Special Representative of the Secretary General on Sexual Violence and Conflict and the UN Action Network. There is growing awareness of this execrable sum of all villainies being used as a weapon of war, particularly against women and children, and tearing apart lives and communities. Shining a light on this horrific crime, Nadia Murad was co-awarded the Nobel for Peace in recognition of her advocacy on behalf of victims of sexual violence and conflict. Nadia, who is the UN Office on Drugs and Crime's Goodwill Ambassador for the Dignity of Survivors of Human Trafficking, suffered unspeakable treatment at the hands of ISIL terrorists who attacked her Yazidi community in Iraq, murdered members of her family, and abducted thousands of women and girls. Nadia's story shows how sexual violence and conflict is closely related to the crime of human trafficking. Armed conflict means that human rights safeguards and the rule of law have broken down. Traffickers take advantage of the instability that ensues and most often operate with impunity. Trafficking for sexual exploitation, sexual slavery, forced marriages, and forced pregnancy are among the most frequently reported forms of trafficking in conflict situations. UNODC is contributing to improving responses to human trafficking in conflict situations, delivering on our mandate as the guardian of the UN protocol to prevent, suppress, and punish trafficking in persons, especially women and children. Our 2018 thematic paper on countering trafficking in persons in conflict situations aims to advance the identification of victims, improve their access to protection and services, and end impunity of perpetrators. And UNODC's 2018 Global Report on Trafficking in Persons has a dedicated section focusing on trafficking in the context of armed conflict, particularly for the purposes of sexual exploitation. Sexual violence is often used specifically as a tactic of terrorism to strike fear within communities and recruit new fighters. And UNODC is supporting UN efforts to ensure that counterterrorism frameworks can effectively address offenses involving sexual violence. In May, we published a new handbook on gender dimensions of criminal justice responses to terrorism. In closing, as a proud member of the UN Action Network, UNODC remains committed to supporting countries in their efforts to prevent sexual violence in conflict and strengthen survivor-centered approaches to achieve justice. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Simone, and thank all our partners. Stay where you are, if you would, for one moment. We have one section on civil society, and we would like to hear from Mavic Cabrera Balleza from the Global Network of Women Peacekeepers. You're right here? Yeah, you come to the lectern. Thank you.
Thank you to the Office of the Special Representative of the Secretary General on Sexual Violence and Conflict, most especially to Special Representative Pramila Patten for her leadership and vision, to the member states who are supporting this event to mark the 10th anniversary of the mandate on sexual violence and conflict. I thank and congratulate Nobel laureates Dr. Denis Mukwege and Ms. Nadia Murad for spearheading the Global Fund for Survivors of Conflict-Related Sexual Violence Victim Assistance Fund, and of course, again, the Office of the Special Representative on Sexual Violence and Conflict for supporting this noble initiative. This fund is important as it is both a symbol of hope and an important resource for survivors in their quest for justice and in their journey to full healing and recovery. Above all, I thank and honor the women who came here to share their stories, and including those who may not be here with us, but who bravely stand against the perpetrators, navigate often difficult judicial systems, and demand justice for the atrocious sexual violence crimes committed against them. This is an important moment to step back and take stock of the many important achievements under this mandate. One such achievement is that the concept of conflict-related sexual violence as a war crime, crime against humanity, and/or constituent act of genocide that cannot be included in amnesty provisions in peace negotiations and transitional justice processes has been widely accepted and has garnered global support. Peace negotiators and mediators, military and police peacekeeping personnel, ceasefire monitors, sanctions experts, war crimes investigators, religious and traditional leaders are now speaking with human rights, women's rights, and peace activists like myself, and together we work with the United Nations, regional organizations, and member states to find common ground and negotiate given our different mandates and agenda. The prevention of sexual violence in conflict is now a central element of our work in implementing the Women, Peace, and Security agenda. This is strongly articulated in the different Security Council resolutions on women, peace, and security, beginning from Resolution 1820. However, stronger commitment and decisive action is much more needed to fully and effectively implement the Women, Peace, and Security resolutions. Full implementation means translating the commitments on women's participation in decision-making, in peace and political processes, in protection of women and girls, men and boys from sexual and gender-based violence, protection of their rights, and provision of quality services, including reproductive health care, into action. Our organization, the Global Network of Women Peacebuilders, is particularly committed to coordinating an independent civil society monitoring of the joint communique that the Special Representative has signed with member states to effectively address conflict-related sexual violence, to hold member states and all policymakers and duty bearers accountable is what we do best. And you can count on us that we will continue to do this with a lot more fervor, passion, and commitment to end the scourge of sexual violence. The Global Network of Women Peacebuilders and many other civil society actors stand ready to work with the Special Representative on Sexual Violence in Conflict UN Action, the Security Council, member states, and everyone who support this mandate, who implement this mandate, and are passionate about ending this crime. We look forward to the day when the only time that we will come across the issue of sexual violence in conflict is when we read it in history books and tell young people about what all of us did to end it, but most especially to tell them about the courage of the survivors to speak about this crime and take action. Thank you.